camera a little better for you. There we go. So what is it today? The 13th of June. Now, I haven't made a post for a while, and you're probably thinking, why has he disappeared again and not told us anything for a while? Well, the answer to that is that we are essentially trapped in a bit of a hiatus at the moment where nothing of any great importance is going to happen politically to Scotland other than the pantomime of the current general election, which we're currently having to endure, really, because, let's face it, whatever way we vote in this general election, nothing really is going to change for us. And that is the entire point of the British electoral system, really. It's just to make sure that nothing changes other than the faces who actually run the country, but the country's run the same way by similar people getting paid similar huge amounts of money to do virtually the same things. So nothing is going to change, and I'm not going to get too bogged down in the general election milieu that's going on at the moment, although I did notice one little contradiction in things between what is said publicly by, for example, the SNP's leadership and what the actual reality is on your own doorstep. Now, we know that John Swinney has basically said, to much I suppose public anger, that the SNP is not essentially putting independence first here in this general election. Well, that's not really a surprise, because we're never going to get independence as part of the United Kingdom anyway, and it's kind of pointless to actually claim that you would. It would have been nice if he'd said that the SNP still is working towards the goal of independence. Maybe he said that somewhere else, but the publicly stated sound bites and comments that I've seen from Mr. Swinney don't say that. However, what did interest me was what popped through my letterbox a couple of days ago, which was an election letter directly from my MP, my sitting MP, who is Amy Callaghan of the SNP. Now, normally I throw these sorts of things in the bin as soon as they come through the door, because mostly they're unwelcome, but this one I wanted to read it and see what she had to say. Most of the way through it, she said the kind of things you would expect a candidate to be saying, that she intended to keep, representing the people of Dunbartonshire, the area I live in, to the best of her ability, and there were certain priorities that she was going to be fighting for, which was fine. But she also stated I think really quite clearly, right at the very beginning of the letter, that she was standing for independence. She mentioned it 2 or 3 times in the letter, actually, that independence was front and centre what she was all about, which was terrific, because that kind of statement is not what's coming from the SNP's leadership at the moment, which is very disappointing to many people here in Scotland who believe that John Swinney has largely just taken his foot off the accelerator and decided to campaign as though it's just an ordinary general election, which I guess it is, just an ordinary general election. But for those of you like me who are feeling absolutely fed up to the back teeth with being stuck in this union, the idea of having to go through this pointless rigmarole of a 5-year general election, every 5 years having a general election that basically changed the faces of the unionists running our country from London, is not something I could ever get excited about. Now, like many other Scots who don't like the unionist parties, and they don't like unionists running the country here from London, you're probably never going to vote for the Labour Party, never going to vote for the Tories, never going to vote for the Liberal Democrats, although I did see one little Liberal Democrat sign in a front garden in Bearsden recently that said, Lib Dems winning here, one single sign about the size of, a tablet. Anyway, be that as it may, this is a largely irrelevant general election for the people of Scotland, because we don't have a say in who gets elected. We never do, we never have, and we never will, and that is not going to change. So why am I bothering to turn up today to talk to you? Well, people ask me, why is it that we can't get out of this union? Why do the politicians refuse to commit to some kind of democratic event where we could vote on it? Why don't we have a referendum? That's what Nicola Sturgeon promised us she would do if we were dragged out of the EU, which we were, triggering this new pledge that we were going to have a referendum, which never turned up, and it keeps never turning up. Now, the answer to this is it can never turn up, and it can never turn up for one very, very simple reason, and that is that according to the United Kingdom, in 1953-54, it came out with a commission which looked at the constitutional status of Scotland. Was it, as we prefer to think of it, a dependency, a crown dependency, or a colony, if you want to use another word, of the English state? Or is it in a voluntary union with England? Is it basically an equal, in a partnership of equals, which it decided voluntarily to join? Now, we know historically the answer to that is no, it's not. However, this commission in 1953-54 was looking at that, and it was actually a British attempt to define Scotland as being in a voluntary union for the purposes of an international investigation which was going to start looking at the status of the British state and the various, shall we say, components that made it up, talking about Scotland, Wales, and a little bit of Ireland. Okay, so England was very keen for the rest of the world to believe that Scotland was in a voluntary union, and so that's pretty much what this concocted thing actually said. It said, to all intents and purposes, to the European Union and to the United Nations, that Scotland had entered a voluntary treaty of union with England of its own bat. It wasn't forced or coerced in any way at all. Goodness me, no. They wanted to become British, and because they've said this in this 1953 determination, and because it was published, and because it was an official government document, and because it was supposedly agreed between Scotland and England this was true, that became what the United Kingdom now is accepted to be. So for the purposes of diplomacy at the UN and for membership of the EU, the United Kingdom is taken to be a unitary state. Now, it's not a country particularly, it's classed as a unitary state for identification purposes. You know, we're treated as one big state, right? And we are a bit of a state, let's face it. So the problem for Scots is, and this has been going on ever since 1707, but more so now since that that pronouncement was made in 1954, that the rest of the world now believes that Scotland is in a voluntary union, and it's very hard to dislodge that idea. However, we know it's not true, and we know that the documentation proves that it's not true. However, the British state and the UN regard Scotland as having already exercised our right to self-determination when we entered the Treaty of Union with England in 1707, despite the fact, the very obvious fact, that there was no referendum. The people of Scotland got no vote on whether they joined the Union or not. It was negotiated by a bunch of very greedy or indebted individuals, a very small number of them in Scotland, who were basically either bought off or blackmailed into signing this document, whilst there was a naval blockade preventing Scotland from importing or exporting anything anywhere, including its own colonies. So we can never really say that the union was voluntary. However, the rest of the world believes it because of this document, because England realised that it was going to have to answer some really awkward questions about why Scotland was trapped in a union, having all its oil, gas and other revenues basically channeled into the English treasury, when in fact Scotland is supposed to be an equal member of a voluntary union. Now, if we were an equal member of a voluntary union, we would have exactly the same number of MPs as England does in its parliament, but we don't. We have 8% of the number of MPs that England has. We're outnumbered 9-1. So if that's an equal union, what are we equal to? We're not equal to England, certainly. So anyway, how do we get rid of this? Because obviously our politicians, our current politicians, both in Westminster and in Holyrood, cannot do anything, because if they call a referendum, then the UN and the EU will not recognise it, because they believe that we've already supposedly used up our one single opportunity to exercise our right to self-determination, and we're not allowed to get another one apparently, according to England and according to the UN, we volunteered to join the Union and never ever come out of it. What? Who does that? Nobody does that, right? Nobody joins a voluntary union that has no way of getting out of it. And even Boris Johnson says no country in the world would join in a union with another where it had to ask permission to leave. How crazy. And yet, that's what this is. So how do we get out? Well, the answer is pretty simple. We have to tell the United Nations the truth. We have to provide all of the legal documentation, the historical documents, everything that is written about this union from before it was signed all the way up to the present day, including this notorious decision by the UK, or England as Britain at the time, to give the rest of the world the impression that Scotland had voluntarily walked into the Union and is perfectly happy to be here, when we're clearly not. At least half of the population isn't anyway. So that's what this programme is really here to tell you, is that we can't move forward at the moment. There is no chance of any political movement towards independence until the rest of the world knows the truth about Scotland and the fact that it is a crown dependency. It is a colony of England's. We are basically absorbed into a kind of greater England as Britain, and they are taking our resources, benefiting from them, and spreading the joy of all of that bounty that they've ripped off from these Scottish resources amongst the rest of their chums, presumably in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, wherever they want to spend it. But the fact of the matter is that that money, those revenues that have been gained by the sale of Scottish resources, were never in the active union. Even if we were in a voluntary union, we never volunteered to give up our control over our own national resources, and our natural resources belong to the people of Scotland under our own crown, which was never extinguished by the Union of the Crowns, and it was never extinguished by the Union of the Two Nations either. So there's a whole lot of technical things that need to be done, legal things that need to be done, and they have to be done outside of the UK in order for the UN and the EU to recognise that we have the right to self-determination now. We did not give it up when we joined the Union in 1707, and we certainly didn't give it up in 1853-54 just because an English government said that. So there's a lot of work to do, and this is what Salvo does. This is why people are mystified by what Salvo is about. This is what Salvo is doing. It is gathering all this evidence, ready to present it to the international bodies who believe that we are in a voluntary union and that we have already used our right to self-determination and we cannot use it again without the permission of England. So this is to set that straight. And at the moment, somebody once said there are no constitutional lawyers in Scotland. There are no experts on Scottish constitutional law in Scotland. Now, why do you think that is? That's because England doesn't want there to be any, because otherwise they would know the truth and they would tell people about it. So the fact that we don't have any constitutional legal experts capable of doing this means that it's much harder for us to get this word out. So anyway, Salvo is doing the job, and that is what I wanted to say today. Really, essentially, I wanted to point out to you the reason for all the doom, gloom and despondency is because we are tied up in a legal trap at the moment. We are being hog-tied by the British state claiming that Scotland voluntarily joined the UK and gave up all its rights to self-determination when it did so. We have to prove that is not the case and never was the case. If we prove that to the UN, International Court is a place to do this incidentally, if we prove that, we get a ruling saying that, then we have a right to self-determination. We can have a referendum anytime we like on any subject we want and nobody can stop us. That's basically what I'm trying to tell you. So that's it from Inde-Car today. Just a brief show basically outlining the current situation as I see it and the work of Salvo to try and salvage this situation and to try to show the rest of the community of this planet that Scotland did not voluntarily walk into this union to be absorbed into a greater Britain that it could never escape from. That's the English wet fantasy dream. That's not ours. We were forced into it at gunpoint, looking down the barrel of a musket, and a bunch of very small number of Scottish people who were negotiators. They weren't even bloody politicians. They were negotiators, negotiated away our entire existence, basically for the price of paying off their own personal debts. And that is how Scotland ended up where it is now. But we can get it out of this, but we have to take our case outside the UK. There's no escape from the UK from within. You can't escape from a prison cell while you're locked inside it. You can only do that when somebody outside provides the key. And the key here is that Scotland does have the right to self-determination. All of us do. But the English state is claiming that we don't. They think that, or convinced the UN that we gave up our right to self-determination when we voluntarily joined this lovely union in 1707, and everything was fluffy and wonderful, and there were bunnies and unicorns, and it was great. No, didn't happen. Doesn't happen that way, and we need to make sure that the UN is disabused of this ridiculous notion. That's it from Inde-Car. I'll see you again soon. Thank you for watching. Please keep donating. It's helping to keep the program running. I am running on literally fumes at the moment. I've got virtually nothing in the bank in terms of any kind of donations at the moment. It cost me a little bit to produce these programs every week and lost revenue from earnings, but today I had a bit of a cancellation, so this one is a freebie. It's on me. Otherwise, I'll see you soon. Keep the faith and remember that we can make it, but support Salvo and join Liberation Scotland. Those two things you can do for nothing. See you soon. Bye for now.